Hi, I am Roshini Appuhami from IIT. I am following MSc in Cybersecurity and Digital Forensics. Today I am going to present my final research project. As in my final research project, I am providing technical cybersecurity readiness framework for the higher educational virtual learning environment in Sri Lanka. When we are talking about this research, first of all, we have to think about the problem background. When we are talking about the problem background of this research, we can say after the rapid spread of the internet in the 1990s, e-learning has spread widely and has attracted much attention over the last decade in Sri Lanka. Currently, in Sri Lankan education system, there is no proper way to monitoring the students' online virtual learning environment. There are several cybersecurity issues that students and other academic parties may face in the virtual learning environment. According to the modern research papers, it says that there is a significant increase in cyber attacks in educational sector. It says that the educational sector experienced a 44% increase in cyber attacks during 2022 when compared to 2021. The problem lies in the lack of comprehensive cybersecurity readiness framework for higher educational virtual learning environments in Sri Lanka. The existing cybersecurity measures may not effectively address the unique challenges faced by educational institutions operating in virtual learning environment. Weaknesses in authentication mechanisms, data protection, incident response capabilities, and resource constraints create vulnerabilities in the current learning environment. It recognizes the need for the proactive and systematic approach to cybersecurity readiness considering the unique challenges and context of the educational setting. Now let's move to research gap. When we are talking about the research gaps, we have to think about the existing research about this area. When we are talking about existing research in this domain, we can see significant number of research has done in this domain. But there are some limitations. As a first limitation, we can say some proposed conceptual frameworks are only suitable for high technical feasibility education institutions only. And also we can say some publications and guidelines can be complex and technical, making them challenging for non-expert or small organization with limited resources to implement fully. And also when we are thinking about some frameworks, we can see some frameworks need very big cybersecurity expertise understanding about to implement these frameworks in their current context. So overall, when we are talking about the research gaps, we can say the study of technical cybersecurity readiness framework for the higher educational virtual learning environment in Sri Lanka is a new area of study, and there are various significant research gaps that may be identified revealing existing work. Existing work frequently neglect the specific weaknesses and trends that virtual learning platforms, online collaboration tools, and remote learning technologies present. This study seeks to address the void by offering observation and recommendation related to the virtual learning environment in Sri Lanka. This is the concept map of this research. When we are talking about the concept map, it is the graphical representation of which is showing relationship between different concepts. Basically, in this research, its literature review has been done via this research concept map. Now let's move to project aim. When we are talking about the project aim, we can say the aim of this research is to design, develop, and evaluate the technological cybersecurity maturity framework for Sri Lanka's virtual learning environment. Now let's move to proposed solution. As a proposed solution here, it's proposing conceptual framework. The framework stresses the importance of some key components over others and the relationship between them by creating hierarchy. This makes it possible to install cybersecurity measures in a methodological and ordered manner, beginning with the fundamental components and working up to more sophisticated ones. And the Framework identifies technical infrastructure as a fundamental domain that forms the basis for cybersecurity readiness. Now let's talk about the key components of this conceptual framework. As a first key component, we can see the risk assessment component, the component security rules and procedures, the security infrastructure control component, the cyber security monitoring component, the user awareness and training component, the incident response component. These are the major key components of this conceptual framework. Now let's move to cybersecurity controls and processes. In this process, as a first thing, we have to assess identification in the domain. It means we have to think about the assess identification in virtual education sector. Then after we have to move to risk assessment, then after conceptual framework implementation. In this case, we have to think about the security rules and procedures, security infrastructure control as the main technical fundamental tool, and security monitoring and response. And also we have to pay attention about the awareness and training sessions too. Then after it's come up to maturity assessment, in next slides, this each and every part will be discussed in detail. Now let's think about what are the core themes of this proposed solution. As a first core theme, we can identify secure information infrastructure. As a second one, data security governance and standards. As a third one, maturity assessment. In this first core theme, you can see it consists 8 sub-areas. As the second one, yes, in this core theme also it consists 8 sub-areas. Then after maturity assessment, let's go to in detail process. Here we can see in this proposed solution, it is represent 6 phases to implementation. As a first phase, critical information assess identification. Then after second phase, identification of the risk. As a third phase, deployment of the frameworks accordant with the intended purpose. As a fourth phase, assessment of the maturity level. As a fifth phase, optimize the deployment. Here, when the level of maturity less than 3, we have to consider the benchmark of maturity level is 3. I will discuss it in next slide. Phase 6, monitoring and regular improvement. Here, now we are going to talk about this framework core themes in detail. As a first core theme, we have to think about the secure information infrastructure. Conduct regular security assessment, implement access controls, physical security controls, secure communication channels and encryption data, regular update and patch system, educate users on cybersecurity best practices, monitor and analyze log, establish an incident response plan. Now let's move to second theme. Here we have to consider data security governance and standards, policy and framework, risk assessment and management, assess control, incident response and business continuity plan, compliance and audit, training and awareness, continuous improvement coming under second core theme, data security governance and standards. Now let's move to maturity assessment. When we are talking about a maturity assessment, there are some significant special factors to talk. As a first thing, this component of the framework's goal is evaluate how well the security described in the previous subsection have been put into practice. The goals of evaluating capabilities maturity criteria are to determine the organization's current degree of technical cybersecurity maturity and to assign restoration measures of a high level of importance. The institution shall be able to determine the present stage of their adaptation by using the maturity evaluation as the self-assessment. Here I will explain what are the 3 major stages of maturity assessment. As a first stage, almost partially performed in accordance with the lowest recommendation mitigation control. As a second stage, possibility of improvement under existing regulation. As a third stage, we have to pay close attention to the suggested guideline. The main goal of the security framework is to adopt maturity level as a benchmark standard within the first year of adoption. Now let's talk about the frequency. At what frequency should assessment be performed? It is proposed that the company assess maturity every 4 months after incorporation and move towards stage 3. This frequency can be changed with the strategic plan and the leadership support of the different organizations. Now we are talking about the evaluation. So evaluation, as a first thing, we have to talk about the self-evaluation criteria. When we are talking about this conceptual framework as a self-evaluation criteria, first thing we can note effectiveness, practicality, align with best practices and standards, usability, scalability. These are the major self-evaluation criteria coming under this research project. Now let's move to expert evaluation criteria and results. In here, we have to think about overall success of the conceptual framework, effectiveness, alignment with best practices and standards, coverage of cybersecurity aspect, usability, and clarity. When we are collecting expert evaluations feedback, first of all, it creates demonstration video and share it to the evaluators. Then after, via Google Sheet, it collected feedback from evaluators. This is the overall summary of that evaluator's feedback. Here, as a first evaluation criteria, overall success, we can say most evaluators has expressed their satisfaction with the framework. Then after effectiveness, most of evaluators agreed that this framework has good effectiveness. And then after alignment with best practice and standards, most of evaluators selected answer with good alignment or a strong alignment. It indicates that this conceptual framework is aligned with the modern international recognized cybersecurity standard, industrial best practices, and relevant guidelines. Then after it check-in coverage of cybersecurity aspect, it also in good level, it shows good answers. Then after usability and clarity, most of evaluators agreed that this conceptual framework is usable and clear and it's easy to understand. So this is the overall conclusion about expert evaluations result. Now let's move to contribution to the body of knowledge. In this topic, first of all, we have to think about the expected contribution. The expected contribution of this research is to develop comprehensive technical cybersecurity readiness framework, especially tailored for the higher educational virtual learning environment in Sri Lanka, addressing the unique challenges of cybersecurity educational institution and enhancing their cybersecurity posture. Final contribution. The final contribution of this research is a strong and aligned technical cybersecurity readiness framework validated for the effectiveness, practicality, usability, scalability, and the compliance with international standards, which is expected to significantly improve the cybersecurity readiness of higher educational institutions in Sri Lanka. Now let's talk about the problems and challenges faced during this research and how they overcome it. As a first problem, I can say limited data availability. To overcome this issue, I established partnership and the collaboration with educational institutions and gain access to the relevant data. Next major thing is time constraint. With work balance and the academic work, it's very hard to balance all things in smooth, streamlined process. To streamline this process, I used Gantt chart and work breakdown structure. By using that two tools, I have overcome this issue. Then after access the experts. When I'm talking about my research, basically to get the evaluation feedback, I needed persons who are expert in cybersecurity as well as experienced person in education sector. In that case, it's very hard to find that kind of personalities and that kind of professionals in domain. However, I schedules and I use very flexible scheduling plans and interview plans and meeting plans to access the expertise, and I overcome that issue also successfully. Then after final one is research score. When we are going to the research score, I can see I used conceptual map to execute and implement this research. And also to overcome that issue, I got supervisors' advice and help. Basically, now we are in the novelty section. When we are talking about the novelty of this research lies in the development of a specialized technical cybersecurity readiness framework designed clearly for the higher educational virtual learning environment in Sri Lanka. The framework takes into account the specific challenges and requirements faced by education institutions, providing practical guidelines and best practices to enhance cybersecurity readiness. Additionally, especially this research validates the framework's alignment with internationally recognized standard and best practices, making it novel and valuable contribution to the field of cybersecurity in the context of higher education in Sri Lanka. Now let's talk about the limitations and future work. When we come up to the limitations of this research, as a first thing we can say limited implementation testing. Actually, in this research, it's provided only conceptual framework. It is not implemented really. So in a real implementation environment, it can be considered as a one limitation. While the framework has been evaluated by the experts, its actual implementation and validation in real-world education environment were not extensively tested due to the practical constraint. Next, after we have to think about the data availability. The availability of comprehensive and up-to-date data on a cybersecurity practice in higher educational institution in Sri Lanka restricted for some institutions, and it is impact the in-depth of the research. External factors such as change in cybersecurity regulations, cybersecurity technological advancement, or involving cybersecurity threat might have occurred during the research. Then after technical expertise, it needs more technical expert implement a framework required to iterative development, testing, and refinement mode. These are the major limitations of this research. Now let's go to conclusion. Here we can say existing skills which used to complete this project. As a first thing, I have a bachelor's in computer networks. So that knowledge helps me to understand the network types and the network infrastructure, network security stuff in the virtual learning education environment, and it helps me to understand the current context and the network infrastructure problems in virtual learning environment. Then after I have a postgraduate diploma in business analytics, it helped me to data gathering part, and I have a education sector knowledge as well as experience. So I know what are the real world issues and what are the real world problems that compromise in the education sector. It helps me a lot to problem background definition process. Then after I have completed certified ethical hacker certification course also. In that course, I learned how to implement cyber attacks and what are the actual practical stuff in these cyber threats. That knowledge also very useful to complete this research. And also my communication skills. I use my communication skills to conduct interviews and meetings. Then after final thing, time management skills. My time management skills help me to complete this project on time. Then after new skills developed during the research, basically when I'm doing this research, I have developed my documentation and technical writing part. And also, I learned about the practical application of cybersecurity concepts. Then, after I learned about the research methodologies, and also via this project, I have gained my analytical skills also. So, basically, in this research, it is given the strong and aligned cybersecurity readiness framework validated for its effectiveness, practicality, usability, scalability, and complies with international standards, which is expected to significantly improve the cybersecurity readiness of higher education institutions in Sri Lanka. Basically, this is the end of this presentation. Thanks for listening.